Hello, and if you were at the last demonstration last week, welcome back. If this is your first time in, my name is Graham Dane. I'm an artist based in Anchorage, and I've been asked to run some workshops on painting. So that's what I'm going to do. Your kits should be available very soon, I hope. And today, we used canvas last week. We're going to use paper, watercolor paper. Normally, I work flat. For purposes of the demonstration, I'm going to use an easel. You don't need to. But because I'm working on paper, I'm going to put another sketchbook behind it just to give it a little bit of support. And one of the other things I'd suggest you do is, most of us have got masking tape around the house. This is where I can't find the end. There it is. No, I lost it. Okay. Let's try a different type of masking tape. That's better. If you are going to work on a pad, flat, I would just, that'll do, keep the edge flat with a tiny piece of masking tape. Now I'm using a pad, but if you've got an old piece of masonite or MDF, a piece of particle board, that will work just as well. You can buy expensive, and I meant to bring one in, you can buy expensive drawing boards with clips. They're about 65 bucks. You can do the same thing with a pair of bulldog clips and just an old piece of MDF. So keep your money. All right, I'm going to work on paper today. And there are different types of paper. I brought a couple in. Drawing paper, recycled. This one is another kind of drawing paper, slightly different quality. This is watercolor paper. Each one of them has a separate job, and the paper that most of us deal with on a daily basis is this stuff, photocopy paper. And this is great for drawing on. It's terrible for painting on, and I'll show you why a little later. So let's go through the materials very quickly. Acrylics. I've set it out roughly as I would set my palette out. My black and white's at one end. I've got a warm black and a cold black. Warm black ivory, cold black Mars black. And then I've got blues, greens, yellows, oranges, reds, and then through to my browns. And the blues that you'll have are going to be ultramarine. And I think you've got it, and phthalo blue. You have phthalo green, two yellows, cadmium yellow, and a yellow light Hansa, yellow ochre, a cadmium orange, a warm red, cad red, and a naphthol or an alizarin crimson, and then two browns, burnt and raw umber. And we will go through all of these over the next few weeks. And what are we going to paint today? Well, a pair of pears, I suppose. I didn't have time to actually go and buy real fruit, so I brought some fake fruit in. And the great thing about fake fruit, as the joke goes, is it never gets smelly or goes off. And as I said a couple of minutes ago, if you get hungry, you can't eat it, so you can't destroy your still life. It's pretty solid, reasonably inexpensive. You can get them, I suppose, in most reasonable chains or even secondhand in thrift stores. But they're very useful. So I've just got two pairs. One is predominantly orange-yellow, one is predominantly green. Last week, we looked at color mixing just using black and white, two blacks and a single white. This week, we'll start dealing with color. And when it comes to color, there are very few rules when you're making art. I mean, sure, some materials work for certain jobs better than others. Some brushes can only be used in certain ways. And I think, as I said last week, if you put 50 different artists, 50 different painters in a room and ask them how to do something, you'll probably come up with 50 different answers. And one will think he or she is correct and the other 49 don't know what they're talking about, and vice versa. But it shows that there are very, very many diverse approaches to making art, and they're all right. You know, eventually, if you do enough of this, you'll work out the ones that work for you. And I can only show you the ones that have worked for me. But it's not hard to wiggle and jiggle these for yourself and get those, you know, that you're most happy with. And painting and drawing is a very mechanical activity. And by that I mean, the more of it you do, the easier it becomes. I tell my students, I teach at the university here, and I tell my students that almost every time I see them, just keep at it, shut your pie holes, work. But I also tell them that the more they do, the easier it will become. And it's just experience. Everybody starts at this level. It doesn't matter whether you're Michelangelo or Picasso. At some point, you have to pick up a brush and start mixing color for the first time. And so we'll start that today. Loosely speaking, when we talk about color, we talk about primaries and secondaries. The primary colors are going to be blue, red, and yellow. These are colors that you cannot mix. Secondaries are usually when two of those colors are being mixed together. So orange, purple, green. And we can talk about primaries and secondaries. We can talk about complementary colors. So for instance, red is a primary, green is a secondary, but those two are complementary colors. With blue, its complementary color is orange. With purple, the complementary color is yellow. Is that important? No, but those complementary colors often work very well together visually. And so we're going to stick with green and red today. And so I said there are very few rules in art. That is true, but there are some. And when it comes to color, the science and the physics of color doesn't change. And when it comes to painting, there are certain rules that likewise, no matter how much you want to bend them, you cannot. So for instance, you have a green. You can't really see it here, but I can put some on my back of my hand very quickly. Phthalo green. Good rich green. Now, it doesn't look anything like this. So how do we get from this to this? Well, this is where one of those rules comes in. To mix a green, you're going to need yellows and blue. You also have a good orange. Okay, again, cadmium orange, fabulous color, beautiful, very, very rich. And to mix an orange, you're going to mix yellow and red. And so these, in some ways, are the only true unbreakable rules within art, and it is color mixing. There's no way I'll ever get a green by mixing a red and a black. I can never get an orange by mixing a blue and a yellow. And one of the colors that we've also put in the kit is Naples yellow. Now, I'll use paper, brushes. I've got buckets of water. One is for cleaning my brushes. One is for adding water to my paint. Keep them separate because dirty water affects the color. It makes it slightly duller. If you keep your one set of water clean, you'll keep your colors nice and fresh. And for mixing, you can use a variety of things. We're going to give you a bunch of these. These are just kind of folders, they're kind of binders. I've just put some paper in it, which makes it a little stiffer. You can also use polystyrene plates, or if you're so inclined, ceramic. They all work. What do these things have in common? They're not absorbent. You can mix on cardboard if you want to, but what will happen is the cardboard will suck out the moisture and the water within the paints, and the paints will dry up. If you leave it on these, it stays fluid longer, which is important. So I'll use this, and I'm going to use a little bit of duct tape. And the reason I'm going to use a tiny bit of duct tape is just to secure the palette down so it doesn't move around when I'm mixing. From an Alaskan point of view, I heard somebody once say, if duct tape was uninvented, Alaska would fall apart. It's one of the greatest things I used to take into the bush when I was teaching, a couple of rolls of duct tape. Give it away, friends for life. So, this and this. So I'm just going to set these two things up so I can see them here. That's fine. I'll just have them standing on their backsides. With oil paint, it's very slow. So when you see photographs and artists have got those huge palettes with all their colors around them, that's oil paint. They can do that because you can leave it on the palette 2, 3, 4, 5 days, depending on the color, and it stays fresh and workable. Acrylic doesn't. Acrylic will dry out quite quickly. And so when I'm mixing my color up, I'm only going to be mixing it in small amounts. So let's start. All right. Yes?
The case there, the white case, could you, and the duct tape, could you move it to the side a little bit?
Let's get rid of those. Okay. I shall also change my specs from my regular specs to my close-up specs. My trusty helper there. He's a little elf, but who knows. Okay, so I have a pencil somewhere, which I cannot find. Here it is. All right. I'm a big fan of drawing. I think if you can draw something, you can paint it. And so you might want to start by perhaps just sketching. Again, you'll have some pencils, a sketchbook, and get used. Again, most people will start drawing and they will sketch and they will use line. So you're defining a shape. But get used to actually just looking at that shape and seeing how it changes. And if you need to work close up, please do. If you want to see how the lights and the darks are working, squint. If you squint, you won't see as much detail, and you just see it in terms of lights and darks. So there's no right way or wrong way of doing this. And you can get used to actually doing a drawing. And your drawing could just be as simple as something like this. It is literally getting used to actually making those shapes. There's a second one behind it. And while you're looking, just under here, let me move these so it's more, hopefully, there's a shadow. And that's really important. We all know the story of Peter Pan. Peter Pan, shadow became unhitched from him. Well, shadows are what tie us down. If you are looking at somebody and their shadow is 3 feet away from them, they're going to look like they're floating. So shadows help ground things. And the art term for that is figure-ground relationship. Every subject has its own languages. Art's no different. I actually have a handout that I'm going to give Charlie, who's doing this with me, on the language of art and design, the elements and principles. I'll email it to him. I'll email it to you later today, Charlie. It'll probably be this evening. So it's available, hopefully, for anybody who wants to sort of get into that. Anyway, we're here to paint, so let's start painting.
Just so you know, the brushes were actually in a really good spot.
Oh, were they? All right. Is that even better? Is that?
That's good.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So again, you can spend as much time drawing this as you want to. Just, if it helps give you some confidence when it actually comes to the painting and gives you a sense of what it's like, then it's always valuable. Okay. So let's start with one of these brushes. Around. Okay. So I am going to start my drawing off. I'm going to start painting by just putting a little bit of Naples yellow down. And again, I don't know if you can see that very well, but that's barely bigger than my thumbnail. So it's tiny. Put the top back on so it doesn't dry out. And I'll start with phthalo blue. Now, color mixing. I used to be an elementary art school teacher for a year at Turnigan Elementary. It was a great job. Kids were fantastic. And teaching them painting was the only time you'd have to be a really strict disciplinarian. You would say, right, put the yellow down, put the red down. But when it came to it, almost guaranteed at the end of every class, they'd mix all the colors together and they'd end up with this brown. And the great thing about teaching kids art is it's all magic. To actually show somebody you can mix white and red and make pink. For a kid, that's, oh my God. Or you can make an orange by mixing yellow and red. It's fascinating, especially when you mix green. And so, start off, a little bit of water. Always start with your light color first, and then add very small amounts, hardly anything, to that color, and you'll see the change instantly. Okay? So I'm going to mix it in and keep it reasonably light. Now, great thing about plastic fruit is I can do this, so you can see the difference. Now, obviously, that's not the right color I need. You can see why I'm covered in paint. So I can clean it off. But, and I don't need it too thick. The reason I'm mixing up a very thin, light color is this. I can look at these two objects, and I need something even thinner. So again, just add a little bit more water. Notice, I'm always going to take it from one pot, not the other. Water will slow down the drying time, and I am just going to literally begin to draw with the brush. Again, I'm going to keep it loose. The kind of shape. Now I'm doing small marks. You can do big ones, whatever you're comfortable with. Okay, and then that shape will come out here. Kind of comes up and round. Let's get a little bit more water on my brush. And I'll start putting the second one in behind it. So again, I'm always looking where things are in proportion to something else. Always look for the direction. And it's okay to make several lines. So this one comes down through here. So that's my very basic shape. Very straightforward. Go to the other bucket. Wash it. Now, when you wash your brush, be kind to your brushes. They're going to be the thing that gets the job done. Don't just swill it around. Put it right down to the bottom so you can feel it. And really give it a good swishing round. And the other thing is, rags, you can use your clothes, whatever. As you can see, I generally do. Clean off the brush, dry it. If you forget to clean your brushes, when acrylic hardens, it's like a spear, and your brush is gone. So, one clean brush. I'm going to start with a flat, nice flat. All right. So I'm going to look at these. And this is where experience is helpful. What you might end up doing, okay, so I've mixed my Naples yellow in with my phthalo green, my phthalo blue, sorry, and I've got one kind of color. All right. Now, I look at this, and I have to ask myself, and it's just trying to put it back in the same place, right? It's a bit too blue. So how do I change that? Well, if a green is too blue, you can add yellow to it. Now, warm yellow or cold yellow? Cadmium yellow feels warm. A Hansa yellow feels colder. So I'm going to stick with cad yellow. So again, I'm going to put just a little bit there. Doesn't need to be very much. And the same green that I started with, I'm going to mix up a little bit more. So again, hardly anything on my brush. Mix it together. So I now have a base, and then I'm going to take a little bit of my other yellow, and I'm going to begin to mix it in. So this is a cadmium yellow, Naples yellow, and just by the addition of that one color, you can see it changes. Now, let's take my plastic fruit again. You should be able to see, compared to this, it looks much bluer. And it looks a little bit darker. So let's clean it off. Put it back. So if it's too dark, we line it up with white. Now, as I said last week, white is your largest tube because this is the color you will use most consistently to produce lighter colors. If you run out of white if you have some household white latex paint hanging around, it will do the same job. So, down it goes. Again, not very much. I can always add to it as I need to. If I put a huge blob there, by the end of the demonstration, half of it's dried, it's gone. So I'm being a little bit Puritan with my stuff. So this is adding my fourth color. A little bit of white. Mix it in. A little bit more. And that white changes the color again. So if I do that, you can clearly see it. Clean that off. So I'm getting there, but I'm going to change the color again by adding a little more yellow. Tiny bit more. Add a little bit more water. Better. That's good enough to start off with. So let's get some water in there. Mix it in well. And now I'll start adding the color. So nice big strokes. The more water you add, the thinner your paint will become. But for the underpainting, that's good enough. So I'm just going to put this in very quickly. And the nice thing about this is that those sort of lines that I drew in, I can now tidy up. Now we may not finish this today. So again, I keep adding a bit more water, so let's make up a little bit more. And sorry, just get rid of the extra. If you run out of paint, great thing is, choose your color, just put a little bit more down. So let's mix some of that in. And rather than sticking it in right at the center, if you can, always take it from the edge. If you're using a dirty brush, it means you don't dirty the colors up so much, but you can see, a little bit happens. Take a little bit more white. Mix it in. And it's worth taking the time to mix everything in pretty well. Take a little bit more white. I think it needs to be a little more yellow. So I'm always kind of looking at this and looking at this. And again, it doesn't have to be exact. The great thing about making art is you get to edit, you get to change things as you want to. When you paint a landscape, you're not going to paint every leaf in the landscape. You'd be there forever. Likewise, you don't have to copy the pear. You can make it feel or look like the pear, and that's good enough. So, got some color in. Let's start putting some of that through here. Now, I'm going to use the same color, and I want to make it lighter. So again, a little more white. And I'm going to add a little more yellow to it because the highlights, the bright parts of this, are different. And so, nice thing about a brush is you can use it many different ways. You can use a corner, you can use the edge, you can use the flat. So you can use a brush in at least 3 different ways, or you can smush it down. You get a different kind of mark again. And so if you've got a couple of colors you're not that keen on, take some time. Mix up some color, see what you can do with your brushes. Again, it's all part of learning. So, on paper, things will begin to dry a little faster. The paper will suck up some of the paint. And I'm going to begin to put in some of those lighter areas. So again, there's a lighter area at the top, and I've got these sort of areas that are coming through here. And because it's a round shape, I'm actually going to do round brush marks. Because effectively, I'm almost drawing the shape of the pear. You can see that while I'm painting. And remember, I used to tell my students, artists never make mistakes, they just change their mind. That's a really nice way of saying, well, actually, we make mistakes all the time, but it just makes us feel better. So, now this is where complementaries come in. I'm using predominantly warm colors, so I'm going to use a warm red. Just a little bit. It's a very bright color. It's beautiful. And again, I haven't even changed my brush. I haven't been mixing any other colors in. I'm going to take a little bit of color, just a tiny, tiny bit of color, and mix it in. And do you see how that changes the color again? In fact, again, if I do that, if you squint at that, it almost disappears because it's the same value, the same light or dark. So I'm really abusing a plastic pear today. Right. So let's put that back. And that new color will go in, and I'm going to start putting in some of my shadows. So again, okay, maybe it needs to be a little darker. So I'll mix a tiny bit more red, a tiny bit more green in, blue in there. So it's almost becoming a brown. And that's okay. I can put that in as well. So when I'm looking at this, I've got a nice area through here. So I will just begin to very quickly block that in. I've also got some color that comes through here. So again, it's not the perfect color, but it doesn't matter because it's going to give me a sense. So again, I said last week that painting is a very forgiving medium. It is. If you don't like what you've done, you let it dry. If you've got a hairdryer around, blast it off, fantastic. Because once it's dry, you can go over the top. So that's a decent start for that. So let's wash my brush out. Give it a good dab. And then I'll use the same rag, clean it off. Okay, I'm going to choose another round, slightly wider. And now, that's dry enough. I'm going to take some of my yellow, just the straight yellow. I'm going to thin it down. Add more water to it. And some of these areas are much lighter, in which case I can now actually take that yellow and just by putting a few quick marks in, it's changing the color slightly. Now, if I mixed it without water and put it on, it would be very different. By mixing it with water, you thin it down. Okay, and again, rag's always handy. By mixing it with water, you can thin it down. And because it's thin, whatever is underneath it will show through. As soon as you mix white with something, yes, it becomes lighter. But by mixing white in with this color, white makes it opaque. And that means that whatever is underneath will not be seen. It will cover everything. So, I'm just going to, I've got some light pieces on the top. So let's put those in there. And some of them are very light, so I'll mix in a little bit of color. And I'm going to use some of the green just to change it very slightly. And effectively, that's where my lightest area is going to be, through here. If you want to make it really light, just choose a bit of the white that's got a bit of the dirtier paint in it, and you can put it on. You might see a few things through here. Now that, if I squinted it, is beginning to give me roughly the form. but it's not smooth. And that's obviously Pears are. So I clean my brush. There are some ways of painting very quickly. There are some subject matters that just seem to explode onto the canvas. There are some artists who work with a great deal of energy and they want to get it done as quickly as possible. They're all fine. But sometimes it just takes time. And patience is a useful skill to have. And the other thing to remember is you may not get it right first time. It may require you to paint something 2, 3 times. You can draw it several times. The more you draw it, the easier it is. The more paint that you mix and play with, and at some point, literally just sit down and mix 2 colors up and see what happens. Mix another 2 colors up, see what happens. Add a 3rd color, see what happens. And if you need to, just literally write that this is a Naples yellow plus phthalo blue. And then that's with white. So you actually begin to build up a record of the colors that you're mixing so that if you sort of think, how did I mix that again? Done it. It's there for you. It's a small little piece of kind of arts admin, and it seems ridiculous sometimes, but it's actually kind of useful. And eventually, you won't need to look at this anymore because you'll have all the memories how to do it. So I'm going to add a little bit more color. I'm going to take my Naples yellow. And again, Naples yellow is a funny looking thing. I'm not quite sure, but like it. I'm going to take a little bit more of my cadmium yellow. Again, just add it. So far, I haven't used that much paint. And I'm going to take a little bit of my phthalo blue, put that as well. And I can tell just from the touching it, that's already dry in places. It's a bit crusty. So I'm going to mix up with water some of this, some of this. So that's my Naples yellow, my cad yellow. Tiny, I can barely see that. Tiny bit of blue, but you'll see the change instantaneously. And I'm going to keep adding water to it. Let's try that. That's not bad. And now, with that thin color, I can begin to work over the top. It's dry already. And as soon as I begin to work over the top, I don't want to work over everything, but those darker areas I put in to show you the shadow, by actually covering them up with a thin layer of paint, and that's called glazing, by the way, you begin to bind it together. Okay, so the disadvantage of using water is that it tends to dry a little slower. But that means I can wash my brush out, and I can let that dry, and now I can work on the other one. So, beautiful colors. Predominantly orange, in which case, we have one of those. So, a small amount of color out. And if I put this orange down neat, add a little bit of water, you can see it's pretty bright. So again, it's not bad actually. That looks quite similar to me. So I think what I'll do is I'll start by taking that shape, so it's like this, and I'll actually just start blocking it in orange. Just straight color. Again, just like the other one, it has this curving shape. So I'm actually going to use curving lines to help me sort of get a feel for that shape itself. If you run out of paint, just pick up a little bit more. Now, obviously, that's way too bright. So I can mix some of that orange, its complementary is blue. So I shall take a tiny, tiny bit of blue, mix it in, and that's how radical the change can be. That feels a bit too brown to me, but again, I'll mix water in with it, and I will begin, because there are some areas around that I will actually begin to put that shade in. And of course, there's going to be a shadow along the bottom. So I'll draw in a line very quickly, and I will begin to draw in a line here as well, and that shadow eventually will kind of come through the bottom. Likewise, add a little bit more water, and at some point when I put a shadow in here, it's going to be a roundish shape. This one's going to be here. I can always come back to those later. So let's very quickly put some of this in. Wash my brush up. And this area through here is different again. So I'm going to take my other red. Now, if you put those two reds together, you can see the difference. One is a cold red. It goes more towards a blue. One is a very warm red. It goes more towards a yellow. Put that back on. And again, this time I'm also going to do the same thing. I'm just going to take straight color, thin it down so it's very fine, and I'm just going to put that color in through here. Just block it in very quickly. It's a very light, almost a watercolor. Okay. Where it overlaps, not a problem. So wash my, actually I won't wash my brush. I shall take some more of that color, and this time the complementary of red is green. Well, I have some greens knocking around. I should go in. I've got a tiny bit of blue on that one, but I can add some yellow to make it a green. And as you add the complementary to it, it will actually make it a little browner. So let's mix some more up. Always start with your light colors first. So I'll make a tiny green. I can then add a little bit more of my red. Add a tiny bit of water for it to move around. A little bit more. And again, just like we did with the other one, when I put those darker, begin to put those darker colors in, I will actually use directional brush marks to help me suggest the shape of the pear. Add a tiny bit of water again. So if you go over something, that's fine. Because effectively, when I'm looking at this pear, in fact, I'll paint on the pear, you can see how that is beginning to curve around? Well, if I can paint that way on a plastic pear, I can paint that way on a piece of paper. So let's put that back, clean that off. So it's going to come down and round, down and round. Clean my brush again. Now, I'm not sure I'll actually get this finished during this one demonstration, but I think it gives you an idea as to color is just, it's a steady build-up. Sure, you can get a great piece of brush and go slap it right down. Again, if that's how you want to paint, that's how I paint normally. But with this, we've chosen to paint objects. So, this is too orange. Or it certainly feels too orange, but when I look at this, it has the same kind of brightness. So in the same way that we did here, I can take a little bit of color. I shall take a little bit of red, a little bit of the other red, and mix them together to sort of kind of neutralize them out a little bit. I shall add water to it, thin it down, small amounts. And I can then go over the other one in exactly the same way I did, and I shall use the red to begin to bind everything together and change it. So again, even here, I'm using those kind of curving lines to suggest the form. Now, it's going to take a while, just because obviously this is smooth color and smooth transitions. This is not quite as smooth. So you just go back, mix up a little more, and a little more. When you mix yellow, blue, and red together, you will get brown. Depending on how brown it is, it's going to depend upon the colors you use. Add a tiny bit more water to it. And now I shall kind of begin to put in some of these shadows underneath. Some of these shadows through here. And you can go over it several times. And each time you do it, those marks will begin to disappear. And sometimes if you need to overpaint something, that's fine. You can always come back to it later. So again, wash my brush out. So far, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 colors. That's all we've used to do everything in here. There is one thing I'm going to do very quickly that's annoying me a little bit. So let's just mix up a tiny bit of a green, put some of the complementary in, thin it down. I just want to get rid of that white line there. And one of the great things about color, which you're beginning to see here, is that certain colors, when you put them next to other colors, where they touch, you seem to get this little frisson. It's almost like a sort of a vibration. And red and green is definitely one of those. They're complementaries. So therefore, I'll just smooth it out. Sometimes you get to change things. So again, I've used a slightly bluer green to begin to build up some kind of shadow. And it doesn't matter if it's perfect. Just the fact that you're still using those directional brush marks gives you, when you look at it, a sense of a line that comes down through here. A brush mark can do many things. All lines are directional. Our eye wants to follow them, in which case, why not use them to your advantage? All right. Now, that's way too bright. So I think I'm going to try something I've never done before. I'm going to take some of the yellow I made up. I'm going to add Naples yellow to it. Again, I'm using quite a lot of thin color at the moment because I'm just slowly building this up. And this time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually cover these lighter areas. Again, now I'm going right up to that edge. And some of the paint will actually mix. And you can even smooth it out with your finger. It's not a problem. So again, I'll keep going through this, building it up. Let's use a different brush. Let's go for a slightly smaller brush. And this time, remember, this is still going to be reasonably wet. I'm going to have to leave it. So I'm going to start working a little way up here. Now up here, it's almost orange. So again, let's take some of my orange. If I mix it with Naples yellow, cad yellow, it will change it slightly. If I mix the same color with my Naples yellow, it does change it. In which case, that's the yellow I'm looking for. Add a little bit of water. And I'm just going to bring some of that color in here. The way you can tone down the color is if you've got a little bit of brown, just scoop a tiny bit. You can mix it in. And you see how just a tiny bit of brown also changes it. So again, I shall begin to use that color. And I shall, again, use those directional lines through here because I want to show the form beginning to build up, and keep the brush marks consistent. So you get that sense of it building up. Now, if you're unhappy with the line, take another brush. You can take another piece. I'll just use it straight from the tube. If I get a little bit of paint on my brush here, I can always paint this out. Nice, firm, clean line. Now you know why I call it a forgiving medium, because everything underneath it is gone. And likewise, you might want to keep some of this in, you might not. If you're not happy with some of this, I'll paint that out as well. So you can add, you can subtract, you can clean up throughout the process. Clean it off. And we won't have time to finish this today. There's only about 10, 15 minutes of this demonstration left. So I've got the basic colors in, but what about the shadows? Let's just put some of those in very quickly. All right. Shadows. It's very common for people to go, oh, I need it to go darker. Let's add black. All right. Well, if you add black to a color, and I'll use an ivory black just to show you. Let's take some of my cad yellow. Nice, right? If I take a little bit of black and add it to it, that's a tiny bit of black. It's changed. Add a little bit more black again, and it's changed again. You're making a value, tonal value. Now, one of the things we did last week was we looked at blacks and whites. You have two blacks. You have Mars black, which is a coal black. It feels bluer. Ivory black has more of an orange tint. And if you are using warm colors, cadmiums, cad yellows, cad reds, if you want to use a black, choose your warm black, because that works better with those particular colors. If you were to use warm colors and add Mars black, it just kills off the luminosity. So let's start. Cadmium yellow and black. Okay. Looking at this, I can actually begin to put in some of those darker areas. I might want to mix up a tiny bit more black in, and let's put a tiny bit of blue in. Let's move that out of the way so I can see what I'm painting. Now, with a round brush, with a point, you actually have a fine line. So it's great for defining an area. It's great for drawing, but you're not going to get a lot filled in. Flat will allow you to do that. So I can actually just take that, look at it, And I'm going to just add a little bit more of each. Okay, I've just broken one of my cardinal rules by sticking a dirty brush right in the center. And I need a little bit more yellow. And if you're doing this, I would advise try and keep your colors in some kind of order. It just means you know where they are if you want to add to them. That is my cadmium yellow. So rather than putting it right in the center, I'll put it to the edge. Take it from the edge. Take it from the edge again. Tiny bit more black. And I'm going to thin that down quite considerably with water. And that's going to give me a green that is a little more towards the blue. It's a little cooler. So again, I want it even thinner than that. And I can actually begin to put in some of those shadows. Now, I'm building up my shadows very slowly. And again, I'm still using that sense of a brush mark. And you're also going over. And you can always smooth things down with your finger. You can always go over an area again, smooth it down with your finger. So you can draw the shape. I should just put a very quick little stem there. If it's too blue, because you're using thin color, you can always just get another rag, get a little bit of water, and you can always, while it's wet, smooth it out very slightly. You're going to find that rags, Q-tips, different textures of rags are all going to be useful tools. So if you have a pile of them around, they will actually, you don't have to just paint with brushes. Brushes are the most traditional way of working, but they're not the only way of working. And we'll introduce some of those kind of materials, just stuff that you've got around the house itself. I think I shall leave it at that for the moment. Last thing I'll do. Let's give it a shadow. Let's make it actually look as if at least one of them is sitting down. So I'm going to choose my blue. And again, you've got some brown hanging around. So just mix it in. Just adding a little bit of that brown just deadens it very slightly. I'll also use a little what's left of my black. And I can actually put a darker area through here. And I can I'll make it even darker. So again, I'll mix a little. Again, practice. Practice and play. And one of the things that can be tricky is this has several different shadows, but there's also reflected light underneath itself. And so if you were going to put the reflected light in, that same color you've just made, if you add just a little bit of white to it, and because it's a slightly warmer color, just a little bit of the green, don't need very much, you can then put that along the bottom. And again, keep the directional thing going. Tiny little brush marks. That will give you the sense of the reflected light that's coming up. I am going to say thank you for watching, and thank you for listening to me. Have a great weekend, and if you've got paint knocking around the house, try mixing it together on something obviously you don't mind getting damaged. Have fun with it. All right. Thank you very much, and I will see you next Friday. Bye-bye. Go. If anybody's interested in learning more about art, I can recommend a textbook. If you're going to buy it, don't buy it brand new. Art publishers really like to, I'm not sure I can say this on a government website. It's Facebook, right? Don't buy these things brand new. They're ridiculously expensive. But some of them are very interesting if you want to learn more on the subject. This is one of them. It's called Exploring Art, A Global Thematic Approach by Margaret Lazari and Donna Schleiser. It really is a good introduction to art across time and across cultures. They're not cheap, but if you go online, you should find a second-hand copy, and you can get them for $5-10 if you're really lucky, second-hand copies. The other one I would advise is called The Story of Art by Ernest Gombrick, Gombrich. It's a very old book. It was written 50 or 60 years ago, and it was my first art history text as a student, but it's still valid. And one of the reasons I like it is it's a very chatty, informal approach to art history. It's in nice bite-sized chunks. But there's something it said that I've always liked and I've always remembered. And what Gombrick wrote was, he said, there's no right reason or wrong reason for liking or disliking a painting. You can like a painting, a landscape, because it reminds you of a place you've been or somewhere you've lived previously. And you can like a portrait, even if it's not somebody you know, because it reminds you of somebody you know. And that's as good a reason for liking art as, this is a really important painting because. I mean, that's valid too. If you want to see good still life painting, I'd recommend a French artist called Paul Cézanne, C-E-Z-A-N-N-E, Paul Cézanne. Painted apples constantly. They're very interesting pieces. Sometimes his tables are skewed, so they have an odd feel. But if you can find them online, look at them and find the biggest files you can and look in, you'll actually see the individual marks. As you begin to mix more, and as you begin to experiment more with mixing, you'll actually be able to look at those paintings and think, I know how he did that. He used a cadmium yellow, a cadmium red, and he used a little bit of burnt umber. And if you see that, try it. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you next week.